I guess, good afternoon now.
Not quite.
Not quite, almost there. Thank you for having me today. My name is Dane Reinhardt. I'm B's nephew. I'm here to talk today a little bit about my grandfather, Franklin Adams, and a little bit about his life and his service in World War II, fitting appropriate for Flag Day. And so let me get the presentation started, and then I'll start.
I keep thinking that says Vino.
My grandpa was born on a dairy farm outside a small town in Oklahoma on April 9th, 1914. Growing up an only child, he helped his parents on the farm while going to school and playing sports. Although both my grandma and grandpa both grew up on a farm, my grandma was always convinced that she had it rougher, and that my grandpa was a mama's boy. Because he didn't always go out to milk the cows, she thought that made him a mama's boy. So it's funny how things change now. But he was a high school pitcher, and he always enjoyed both playing and watching sports. He and my grandma actually met and were married on December 16th, 1940. This was a tough time to find employment, and he worked various jobs across the country. I remember my grandma talking about a job picking apples in Washington one year, and then having to find ways to travel back home to help out with the dairy farm. He and my grandma bought a dairy farm and eventually sold the farm to a dairy company, and Frank went to work for this company. During this time, there was a tumultuous period during our country. World War II was set in motion in Europe, and the United States was looking at doing a draft. In January of 1941, Frank and my grandma were living in Marlow, Oklahoma, and were working on the farm when he joined the Army of the United States. Frank joined the war before the war started in the U.S., but was aware the draft would probably select him anyways. This was one of his main reasons for wanting to join, because he knew that he could choose which branch of the military he would go into, instead of the military putting him in one, as the draft would do. This put him in a group that was able to gain valuable training and expertise and experience before being sent overseas. The following September in 1941, he was assigned to the 45th Infantry Division, where he began basic training at Fort Sill in Oklahoma. He continued this training at Camp Barkley in Texas. At Camp Barkley, my grandfather was trained as a machine gun operator and was well known for his marksmanship. His friend Jack White, also from Marlow, said Frank could hit a square peg at 300 yards and likely one running as well. It means he was a pretty good shot. After a few short months at Camp Barkley, his division was moved to Fort Devens, Massachusetts. Here he underwent amphibious assault training. This training was in preparation for the invasion of Sicily and later Italy. My grandmother stayed in Massachusetts during this training, but moved back to Oklahoma once Frank was deployed overseas. After traveling to North Africa in June of 1943, the division landed near the coast of Sicily, where my grandfather was separated from his unit. His boat team was beached 7 miles from their objective, and he led his detachment to rejoin the company. Along the way, he assisted other units in capturing objectives and evacuating the wounded. And after his initial landing, it was the 45th's responsibility to drive the Italians and the Germans from key positions that were well defended. This was a very vital part of the beginning stages for our invasion of Italy, and my grandpa played an instrumental role along with his company. During this push, 2 companies of about 250 men each, one of which was my grandpa's, were ordered to secure a town named Biscari, and it had a major airport. This major airport was there for resupply for the Germans and Italians, so it was very vital that we captured this. They were opposed by 2 German regiments, which could include up to 1,200 men each. So if you do the math, that's about 500 versus about 2,400 if it's a full complement for both. After a very difficult advance through the town, there were about 8 enemy tanks that were actually either captured or destroyed during that time. The Germans decided to retreat and defend only the airport. This being a vital source of resupply, they abandoned the town and went to the airport, and it was up to my grandpa's company, along with Company A, my grandpa's company was L, they were supposed to take this airport. Many of the bridges were blown up along the way in an attempt to slow the Americans, but it was unsuccessful, and by using certain tactics they had learned while in the United States, they were able to take the airport intact. For his actions in Sicily, my grandpa, Frank Adams, received the Legion of Merit from the United States. He was one of only 3 men awarded this medal in the division during the entire war. During this time, my grandfather served under the famous General George S. Patton. I'm sure some of you have heard of. Patton also considered the 45th Infantry Division to be one of the most well-trained divisions he had ever commanded. He always said he had no problem with Patton's infamous treatment of the soldier where he slapped him and told him to get back into the fighting. He said that this was something that all of them wanted to do their duty. None of them wanted to be there, but they all wanted to make sure that they did their duty. So my grandpa had always mentioned that that was something that he understood. In January of 1944, following their successful campaign capturing the island of Sicily, the 45th took part in the invasion of Italy, beginning on the beaches of Anzio. This was a very hard-fought battle for my grandpa and his fellow soldiers, first against the Italian army, and then against the German army coming to support their Italian allies. Frank had always said that he believed that the German troops were well-led and well-equipped, but less experienced than the American and British forces, which gave them the upper hand. It was during this time that my grandpa was promoted to platoon tech sergeant and was responsible for anywhere from 26 to 50 men at a time. My grandpa was always very concerned with the safety of his men. It was of paramount concern for him. When his friend Jack from Marlow was going home on leave for a few weeks, Frank told him to make sure he got in the bottom of the boat and not to stick his head out until he was in the United States again. Jack did so and made it home okay. My grandma loves sharing that story with me. It's one of her favorites about my grandpa's wartime experience is his concern for his men and the things that he did to make sure that they were safe. Frank often wrote home to my grandma about all the interesting things that he had experienced, that his military service had afforded him, but he also wrote of his longing to be home soon. My grandma would send care packages to him that would include anything to make a soldier's life easier, things like soap or candy. But what my grandpa most liked was warm clothes. He would always appreciate a scarf or a sweater or anything else sent with a letter that would show, something that was from home. For his meritorious conduct and service, Frank Adams was awarded many medals by the United States, as well as the Italian army, whom the division helped in driving the German army out of Italy once Italy had surrendered. Following the Italian campaign, my grandpa was transferred back to the United States, where he was stationed as an instructor for new machine gun operators going overseas. He was responsible for the training and making sure they knew what they were getting themselves into with the upcoming battles. After the war ended, the military had much less need for active military men, and my grandpa was honorably discharged and eventually moved back to Marlow, Oklahoma, where he and my grandma Elizabeth raised their 7 children. Once back in Marlow, he worked on the dairy farm with my grandmother until they sold it, and he went to work for the company that bought it. He worked for this company for the rest of his life and retired with them as well. He was a lifetime member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars and the American Legion, and he also took part in his local booster club. He was a very instrumental part in that booster club. Frank loved golf, tried to play whenever he could, and this must have rubbed off on his relatives because many of us are active golfers as well. Listening to stories my family would tell about him, he was a man who expected discipline but was fair in everything he did, and he always lived his life by a certain code, and he was very prideful in the work that he did, loved Oklahoma football, and he stayed very active in his community and his family's lives. He provided a good role model to all and someone you could always trust, regardless of the time. He was very proud of his service to his country and to his family, and although he passed when I was very young, I saw great memories of riding to get the mail on his rascal and spending days with him watching us play. We remember him with great pride and love. Again, my grandpa Franklin Adams, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
We appreciate it.
Thank you. Any questions or?
Anything you want to add?
No? Okay. Thank you very much again for affording me this opportunity. I appreciate it.